A while back I did a tour of my electronics laboratory and music recording studio, and since I've done a number of projects involving woodworking and so on, I thought I would do a quick tour of my shop in the basement of my house. It's not a very big space, but I managed to jam a lot of stuff in here, and unfortunately I didn't clean it up for this video, so there's junk everywhere. It's usually not quite this dirty, but I've got several projects going on at once. And I'm also relocating things, so there's things out in the middle of the floor that usually wouldn't be there and so on. But anyway, I've got my clamping station here with several different sizes of belt clamp, pipe clamp, spring clip, the little pipe clamps, my grinder wire brush, which I use quite a lot, my storage area for powered hand tools, circular saw, big Milwaukee belt sander, there's a Black & Decker nail gun in there, electric, there's a saber saw, just a cheap one there, my old $9 skill drill that still works great, but I usually use my cordless these days. A Skill belt sander, it's a smaller, lighter one than the Milwaukee. There's another electric stapler and a hand grinder and a hand router, a bigger Milwaukee grinder, or I'm sorry, that's a Craftsman actually, grinder and sander. I believe this is Craftsman. It's another circular saw, not quite as big as the DeWalt one down here, and a Bosch planer and some bigger pipe clamps strewn around this thing. One thing I've got that I'm really glad I set up was a little shelf here for my basement phone, the charger for my Milwaukee electric screwdriver, two charging stations for the DeWalt tools that I have. Mostly they use the same battery. One of the tools uses the other style of battery, so I have one charger for it. I've got my little used Next tag there, so I remember which one I can use and kind of rotate the batteries. I've got a Uline polybag sealer up there, and I don't even remember what's in this thing. Oh, it's just an empty bag. And then various things like a hot glue gun. Some of these tools I haven't used in so long I don't even remember what they are. Oh, that's the Norstrand electric knife, hot knife that is, for cutting foam. And then I've got, you know, some things like air in a can and various boxes for CDs and DVDs down here, but my main stock is elsewhere. It's just overflow down here. I keep a lot of, I've got a plastic banding machine for putting bands around large boxes. I ship a lot of large containers, so I've got that down there, the supplies, various paint cans, Portland cement, lubricants, all that kind of stuff. I've got a Milwaukee Sawzall. This is a DeWalt fiber, it's not a fiber optic, it's a borescope. And this is a Craftsman jigsaw with laser and all that stuff. It's a really nice one, a lot of features. And a Dremel Multimax, and a Dremel Trio, and a Dremel Sawmax. Everything in a place. Right now I've got my Craftsman wrench set, metric and English, which is being used at the moment, so it's open on the floor. And over here I've got a English and a metric wrench set that are older and less complete than the Craftsman one. And trash bags, and I've got 3 automatic utility pumps that I can set up in various places if there's water. And this is a Makita oscillating sander, which I use quite often. And a Brady BMP 21 Plus label printer. Got a lot of extra parts for Dremel back there. Got a whole slew of these ITW drywall anchors, the metal ones, not the plastic ones like they sell in the hardware store. I'd requested ITW to send me 100 of them once, and they typed in 2 extra zeros by accident and sent me 1,000 of them. And to their credit, when I called them on it, they said, just keep them, don't worry about it. Various lubricants, cotton gloves for various things. I make some musical instruments. I keep a lot of the mandrels and jigs back there. I have 2 water systems in my house. My town's on Lake Michigan water. I did a video on that. And I also still have a private well, so I've got 2 lines there with their filters. And I've got a bunch of storage. This area is in flux. I'm moving some stuff out of it and moving things back, but I've got some nice storage shelving there. I've got about a 6-foot square area just stacked with boxes from things. Because I do a lot of shipping out. I sell a lot of stuff on eBay, and it's nice to have a bunch of boxes of various sizes. I just pile them up here in the corner. I've got a pipe organ, not a very big one, but a small pipe organ in pieces in my basement, and that's the organ bench for it. And I also have a roll of craft paper here, which I use for everything from padding boxes to drop cloth to making stencils on and all sorts of things. I've got a guillotine cutter here, which I originally bought when I had a project to scan a whole bunch of periodicals, and I got a Fujitsu high-speed double-sided document scanner, but you had to shear the bindings off everything, so I bought this for that. It has a home here on a little work table. And again, pardon the disastrous mess here. I've got an old Chicago telephone which isn't big to work on normal phone lines. I'm just trying to figure out where to put it. And I've got my utility sink here. Because the basement's below the sewer line, underneath a layer of dust down there, I've got a lift pump, basically. It's a sump pump in a watertight box. And I just did some cleaning on the basement floor, so I've got my Hoover flat floor wet dry cleaner out here for drying in pieces. I've got a rigid shop vac down there. It's one I mostly just use when I have to go to some of my remote locations and vacuum. I don't usually use it here at home. I've got a hydraulic press, small Harbor Freight type Kennedy tool kit or tool case. I've got a really nice wooden one that's back over there with the boxes that once I find a place to put it, I'll probably use that for something. And I've got this US General, which I don't know, I don't remember who makes that. I think I bought this from a Harbor Freight store, but right now it's got all my breathing masks, cartridge and paper, my face shield for table sawing, because I don't know where else to put them at the moment. A bunch of metal shims in various thicknesses. Hidden back behind there's my furnace and air conditioner. I've got some engraving equipment down there. My very first multimeter that I bought in Germany when I was a teenager. Still works, don't use it. Then just the usual stuff, taps and countersinks and screw extractors, all sorts of knife blades for the various types of knives I have. Sheet metal shears of various kinds, spring tweezers, profile bar, whatever these things are called, an old-fashioned micrometer. I don't want to go through every tool here, but some of the metric and English box wrenches, just more convenient than opening up the Craftsman case. Various miscellaneous tools, little hand torch, little tiny pin drill, and a pin drill adapter for a regular drill press. Oh, what was down here? Oh, these are, yeah, just some hex wrench sets. This is my Tapcon drawer. I've got the Tapcon tool here. Various miscellaneous chuckable bits for things. I have a project I use a bunch of phenolic washers for, keep them in here. My Tapcon screws. This is with the Milwaukee cordless screwdriver nut driver and its accessory set. Some vice grips, whichever tape measures I'm not using at the moment, and a set of weird adapters for various types of specialty screws. My LED headlight when I need to use it. Another thing, this is a Craftsman, also specialty bits. And this is just garbage down here. Various sealers and shoe glue and lithium grease and thread lockers of various sorts. Nylon string. A beam compass. And this has got a lot of measuring tools of various sorts. And nut drivers in English and metric. And one of the tools I never live without, I've got these in 3 different places in the house. A good old English and metric Chapman set. Various calipers and measuring devices, protractors, digital and otherwise, digital angle gauge, stuff like that, and a set of pipe dies down there for threading pipe. And my old Dietzken compass set from when I was studying drafting as a teenager in Germany. This is a plumb bob with the cord and the weight, and some inspection mirrors, a bag of forensic scales. Those are great when you have to take pictures of things and you want the scale to actually show up in the pictures. And down there's an old Alvin electric eraser, a Weller soldering iron when I need to solder down in the basement. I've got a much nicer set upstairs. PVC cutters, a couple of bolt cutters, a armored cable cutter. Actually, I have 3 bolt cutters down there, different sizes. I've got my spot welder back in there. Great big hole saw for something, I forget what I got it for. A set of Forstner bits. the case from my Dremel tool with the flex cable and a bunch of bits. I guess while I'm opening up toolkits, I might as well open up this one. I don't even remember what everything is in here. There's a digital tachometer in there and stud finders and things like that. Various bits for my Sawzall, some bearing pullers, and the case for my digital micrometer. Just more junk in this case, things that just odds and ends that I don't go into very often. I do have a nice Exolite set of nut drivers here. Those are very nice to have. Various Greenlee tools for punching holes in sheet metal and hole saws. Some small taps and dies. And this is basically hex wrench inserts for going into one of the Exolite nut driver tools. Miscellaneous drill bits. Just junk, a bunch of miscellaneous parts, specialty screwdrivers, deburring tools, a bunch of spade drill bits. And I do some various specialty epoxy potting with the Scotchweld potting compound, and I've got the tool for that and a couple of the cartridges for it, and a couple of molds there for some of the things that I mold in epoxy. Can't live without your wall outlet tester, and a couple of spare zip tie tightener cutters. Okay, so much for that. In front of my utility sink I keep all my chemicals, solvents and junk. And usually this bench is really clean and there's not much on it. One of the few things I usually keep on it is my large drill index and my box of nitrile gloves. But I've got a whole bunch of projects going on at once here, so there's just everything piled up on the bench. Just miscellaneous tools there. I've got my angles and carpenter's rule up there. Rules, angles. I was working on my Tesla coil, musical Tesla coil kit, and I was going to modify it, and I got interrupted by all these other projects, so it's still sitting out here with paper towel on it to try to keep dust off the critical parts. And my files and chisels, my pull saws, use those all the time, fish tape, a couple of caulk gun frames there, wood filler, staples for the electric staplers, hacksaw flashlight, C-clamps, bubble levels, bench vise. Everything else is junk that usually goes somewhere else. And I've already covered in my other couple of videos my sump pump and power outage monitoring system that I designed and built ages ago. My Grace Digital internet radio so I can listen to stuff in my shop. Basement Watchdog, which I've covered in another video. Batteries for the Basement Watchdog. Okay, going over here, I've got my Craftsman table saw with the cast wings on both sides. It's a really nice saw. I've been using it forever, but it's starting to have a problem with one of its bearings and it's getting kind of noisy. One of these days I have to get ambitious and deal with that. And it's on casters, of course, so it can roll around. I can reposition it. This is its normal place, but if I have to work on large pieces, I can cut a 4x8 sheet of plywood on this if I want to by rolling it out into this aisle. Or long boards, I can rip long boards by doing sort of the same thing. I can twist it at an angle and even get longer pieces in there by going at an angle. And a jet mill drill, which I use rarely, but it's nice to have. You may ask why the table's way off to the side, and that's because the door to my backyard is right there, and if I don't have it over to the side, every time I come in here I get caught on that handle. Right now I've got some woodworking projects going on, so I'm piling up woodworking stuff here, but this is my jet metal lathe, which I use somewhat more often. I rarely work on steel. It's usually brass and aluminum and various plastics, Delrin and so on. I have a specialty outlet there on 4 different circuit breakers for my 4 oscillating heaters, because this is the area where I usually set them up to dry things. And I do have my house set up for my generator. People have probably seen my video on trying to quiet my portable generator, but that does plug into the outside of the house, and this is the Connecticut Electric generator switch. Obviously the circuit breaker panel, that's the long cable for the generator, and I mentioned before I have some of these emergency pumps. I keep all the hoses for those reeled up here. I've got a small bench drill press, Harbor Freight thing, but it's been working fine, does what I need. I've got various mill bits and chucks and bits and pieces stored in between here, and a little Harbor Freight belt disc sander, which gets quite a lot of use. I've got my DeWalt scroll saw. This is a pretty nice unit. I'd gone through several cheaper ones that were always unsatisfactory, and this one does the way it this one works the way I wanted it to work, and I'm quite happy with it. I store some stock up here against the wall. Got a rigid sander here. It can be a belt sander or a drum sander. I've got the fence for my bandsaw there for the moment, and that's my Grizzly bandsaw. And one of my newer tools down here is my and you gotta pardon all the crap on the wall. It weeps down here in the winter, and it stains the wall, and I spray it with ammonia and other things to try to cut down on the mold, but there's still just a lot of discoloration, and since it's behind everything, I just kind of let it go. A cut-off saw or a chop saw, whatever you want to call it. This is a rigid one, and it's on its stand, which if I need more room or if I want to transport it, this stand flips it up vertical and goes into a much smaller space, becomes sort of like a hand cart for it. And if I pull it out, then it's got these extenders on it which support the work. They go way out several feet to each side, or you can raise the raise them and have them become work stops. Anyway, that works pretty well. It's got the laser on it to help you find what you're cutting. Back on this side, I use this bench to store electrical and plumbing supplies, and it's also where I keep most of my dowel rods and angle iron and bar stock and so on along the back of the table, and I keep various sheet metal and pieces of plywood and stuff stored along here. And this is a Craftsman wood lathe, which I got good service out of, but it has a bad bearing, and it's actually a Franken lathe. I made it out of 2 different lathes, a Harbor Freight and a Craftsman. Each one had characteristics that I liked and characteristics I didn't like, and they appear to be made by the same manufacturer, probably in Taiwan or something, and the parts were all interchangeable on them, so I mixed and matched the pieces to get one good one and sold the remaining one that I built out of the remaining parts. But now some of the metal pieces are breaking like this, and it's got several issues that make it less than a joy to use. And I actually have on order, and will probably have a couple of days after I make this video, a new Grizzly lathe of about the same size, but it's a much nicer, more powerful one, and it has a copy attachment on it and some other stuff, and that'll still go on this table, so you have to imagine a nicer lathe there. I've got these little box fans. I actually put furnace filters on those and use them when I'm spray painting down here to draw the overshoot mist towards the filters instead of letting it just settle on everything. That actually works pretty well. And I was just doing some other work, so my jet metal cutting bandsaw is currently piled with tools, but that's the metal cutting bandsaw. I use it in the upright position because I'm usually not cutting a lot of bar stock, but it can flip down and it's got the vise and everything. And here's a tool that I don't use a lot. Well, I don't use it regularly, but I do use it a lot for various things, and that's my router table with just a good old Craftsman handheld router upside down on the bottom. And I use this to do dado type joints and also to cut for making rabbet joints, and those are my two favorite types to use when putting wooden pieces together, especially for all the custom instrument cases I make. So this gets used quite a bit. The only real drawback to it is the fence is just plastic and it doesn't have a real good adjustment mechanism, so it's sort of a pain to set up for a job, but once I have it set up, it works really well. Got to have those ear protectors. And then around here I've got a irrigation system timer here covered with bugs and spider webs. It's not where it usually goes, but that's my DeWalt planer, which has appeared in a number of my videos. It's on a wheeled cart with locking casters, so I usually wheel it out from where it's stored here when I want to use it. And I mentioned before I have a pipe organ, and it's stored down in this area, and most of the bigger wooden pipes are on that one shelf, and some of the pipes are stored elsewhere, but some of the metal pipes are up here. And the blower is down in that gray box, and the wind chest is in the back there. It's kind of hard to see, and another wind chest is up in front. I don't have any I'm sorry, not wind chests, they're the regulators. I've got a large and a small regulator there. And then I only have one wind chest stored here, and it's a real tiny one for some small pipes. But you can see there's, underneath all the cobwebs, there's a bunch of metal pipes, and some of these boxes are just full of the smaller pipes. You can get quite a lot of small pipes in a box if you pack them tight. And my various LED work lights that go on stands, and a couple of the old halogen ones. I've got some musical instrument cases. I've got my Fender PA system that I use quite often. And what else? I've got a little Tonka road grader that I had when I was a little kid. One of my few things that I still have from when I was young. I've got my various rolls of wire when I do wiring projects. And I mentioned I do a lot of shipping, so I've got several rolls of bubble wrap of various sizes. I've got some poly bags there, which I have that Uline poly bag sealer on the other side I showed earlier. There's the rolls for that. I've got the poly strapper that I showed the supplies for before, but its parts and tools are here. Box for bicycle stuff to work on bicycles, and any model paints and tools are stored there. When I do airbrushing, I use the Badger system, and I have a can of propellant sitting there. There's a first aid kit down there, miscellaneous junk. Here's some of the tape for my strapping kit. I've got a whole bunch of foam bags stored up here for UPS, FedEx, Postal Service. There's actually an optical tachometer down here, a real old one, but it works well. Oh, here's an electric train. The Marx O-gauge electric train from around World War II. I've got all the track and cars and 2 locomotives and switches, couplers, all that stuff in there. I haven't taken it out in ages, but it's in real good condition. And let's see. There's where my city water comes in. We have Lake Michigan water here. work stand for my regular bicycle, which is out in the garage. And this is actually a bag full of work light stands and stuff, and that's a tool for putting tires on high wheel bicycles. People who've seen some of my videos know I do some of that. I've got a broken bell for a sousaphone up here, but it's reserved for my good sousaphone in case something happens to its bell. I've got this one. It's ugly, but it works. And I store my heaters here at the moment. I do a lot of stuff with polyethylene foam, closed cell polyethylene. I store it here, and I've got some electronic projects I use where I've got this sheet metal screen material. Store that here. And people who've seen my Catrike Road video in the winter, I keep it right down here in the basement. It's not where it usually goes at the moment. It's usually back in the corner more, but I had to get in there and I pushed it out of the way. The bubble wrap is to keep sawdust and things from settling onto the seat. And let's see, I've got 2 big trash containers full of foam peanuts. Both the foam ones, or the plastic foam ones, and then the biodegradable ones that are made out of, I don't know what they're made out of, cornstarch or something, in there for whichever kind I want to use. And I've got a Karcher pressure washer down here, which usually stays in the garage, but in the winter I'm worried that some residual water might freeze and damage it, so in the winter I roll it down here. Again, it usually goes more in the corner, but I had to move it out of the way to do some other stuff. So let's see, did I fail to cover anything? I think that's most of the main stuff. And I apologize again for it looking so ugly at the moment. It's usually not this chaotic and dirty, but that's what you get when you're doing several concurrent projects and you don't clean up before shooting your video. And I mentioned earlier in the video that I was getting rid of my old Franken lathe that was made out of a Harbor Freight and a Craftsman lathe combined, and I've replaced it with this Grizzly lathe. It's a model G0462. I've been quite happy with some of the other Grizzly stuff I've bought in the last couple of years, so I stuck with their brand. It has a variable speed motor. Well, the motor is the same speed, but it uses a variable speed belt drive. And it has a swivelable head. I forget the proper term for that, but by using the lever and pulling this out, you can swing the whole head 90 degrees out, so if you wanted to turn a big bowl or something, you're not limited by how far the bed is from the headstock. And then I've got this banjo type tool rest that allows you to swing way out far in front of the tool in order to do things like turning bowls. I don't ever turn bowls, but it could come in handy for something. And I was just playing with it here with a piece of scrap wood a couple of days ago, and I haven't cleaned up yet. It's still piles of sawdust around, but it seems to be a pretty good lathe. It has the digital readout. And I actually have another video on this, but I do have a copy attachment for this lathe, and it sits down here on this rolling tray or cart with all of its attachment pieces and the copy attachment itself, bits and so on, and I can just roll it out from under here whenever I want to to use it. Haven't actually used it yet, but it's available. And I think I'm going to be investing in a simple tool rest for this, since the banjo type is a little bit of a pain to use sometimes if you're not actually using it for its intended purpose. Hope you thought this was interesting.